Hey, Ann Sweet and Peter Mitchell, let's talk about fields.
Indeed.
Oh,
Ah, where do you want to start?
well, I just came back from a place in North Carolina where it was a gathering of source keepers, which meant people have had some experience in this area chatting with each other and doing experiments. And one of the things that was really of interest to me to ask everyone there, and so I'd like to ask the two of you, is when do you typically when do the participants feel that the field is strongest? Like, are there any patterns in the moments in which people detect it being sort of the thickest and most salient that it gets?
Well, I mean, my experience has been right at the very beginning when it started about 3 years ago, it was very, very subtle. In fact, in the first meeting, we didn't even necessarily we knew something different had shifted, but in terms of what that might be, we had no idea. And so over 3 years, um, the field itself has just deepened. I think as people have started to come into the group and experience the field, there's a letting go. And it's in that letting go that the field itself seems to strengthen. So the more transparent the people are who are in the group, the more you sense the field arising and the more it's kind of a two-way process. So it's kind of like the field itself opens up something in you, and as you open up, the field itself starts to strengthen and grow. So it kind of depends on who's in the group at any one time, what length of experience they've had, but it also seems to have more stability than that. It was a bit fluctuating in the beginning as people were sort of a little reluctant necessarily to let go of stuff, but we turn up to a meeting now and there's a sort of an expectation that it's going to be present and sort of facilitating in a way what's actually happening. Yeah. But if you want to add anything, Dan.
I think what really creates the depth and the recognition is when anyone speaks from a very authentic and real and vulnerable place, when there's a risk of speaking from what is not already known and a kind of reaching for their reality or their truth. And then there's a kind of hyper listening and a hyper quality that then emerges. And if people are sensitive and follow the thread of what that person is saying or trying to say, then we just go deeper and deeper, and then that field becomes very, very apparent and very, very strong. So it depends a lot on everyone's willingness to listen carefully, to not have pre-prepared answers, and to be willing to kind of just open themselves to, God, this could go very badly for me. Being willing to risk that element of risk seems to be really important, and the vulnerability that goes with that.
So there's an accumulation of its visceral quality over time that has to do in part with people learning the skill set of being transparent to it. But there's also moments where it increases in strength that have to do with vulnerability and authenticity and risk taking in an individual and the way in which they're being met and having that risk followed by the listeners.
Very
Yes.
nice.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. It feels like a two-way process that the field itself responds to the vulnerability of the people present and facilitates that vulnerability itself. So it's a two-way process. It feels to me that it's the field is an active participant in the process, as well as the individuals making themselves available to the process. So yeah.
That's very interesting to me, the two-way element of it. If I hold spaces, very often I put aside my regular internal practices and just resonating with the field becomes the dominant practice for me in the spaces. And it does seem to involve almost like a kind of a breathing. right? It's sort of, it reaches out and then I reach out, or this sort of back and
Yeah.
forth movement goes on within the process. Now, that is also something that I feel like I've experienced in, I don't know how to say this, more lopsided fields, or field where there's one primary transmitter or field holder and everyone else is
Yeah.
receiving. And the relationship between those kinds of fields and these more, I don't know, emergent intersubjectivities that we're discussing, that's really interesting to me. Because there's a lot of the next guru is the Sangha kind of thinking that goes on around this stuff.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
curious what you think. Are there things that a circle around a powerful individual transmitter can do that a field does not, and things that a field can do that an individual can't? Or are our fields just sort of gradually outperforming individuals?
I think when you're in the presence of a very, very strong transmitter, there is there's a sort of an implicit hierarchy that you almost unconsciously plug into, that you sort of, I'm just thinking of my experience with a strong guru in the past, where I would put down my own authenticity in a way to receive something that I felt was higher and better than I could ever achieve in myself. And I think that's not necessarily a wholesome position it's a sort of an assumed position rather than a discovered position. You sort of take the inferior. It's just the nature of the dynamic. Whereas I find in our group there's people with more experience, and you are aware that they to some degree may be directing the flow within the group, but it's much more democratic. And what makes the group work is people standing completely in their own authenticity, being at whatever level they are, and being willing to talk from that place, because that's what opens everything up between us. So I think there are the big differences in the dynamic, just because of the assumed positions that you take. I don't know what your experience of that is then.
I think you said it very well. I think in the group that we're talking about, there's an ownership of that rather than a consuming of that from someone else, or a reliance on that from someone else. So this is self-generative. To participate, you actually have to be present for it, rather than just kind of waiting for it to be granted, in a sense, or to be absorbed. So it's a different position. It's a different place you're coming from or resting in.
Yeah, there's a very basic distinction which has to do with which elements of yourself you enter into the field with or not.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question about context and open-endedness in how we're framing these events, because you can get together with a group idea or a group inquiry or something like that, and there are ways in which it seems like that might help get people initially aligned. But then there are these processes that seem to occur only when you give up your framing, give up your goal, and you're more attentive to the living emergence in the moment. Does it seem to you that sort of like overall just learning to have no goal and be attentive in the moment is the best strategy? Or is it something like maybe early on in the process of the formation of a field, it might be more useful to have that shared apparent context, and as skill develops, we let that go?
I don't think right from the very beginning, we never had an agenda in any meeting at all. Because it just started out as four friends getting together just because it felt like a good thing to do. And we enjoyed the process. And in the we just thought, well, this is good, let's do it again. And each meeting would have its own character. Sometimes there'd just be this wonderful sense of joy at meeting in something that was got nothing to do with our shared history. You didn't have to bring all your baggage. It was just the alive quality of what we were meeting in, and it was a joyful thing to do. Others meetings, we would just sink into silence, and that you'd be sitting looking at a screen of four faces, and nothing was going on, but it was not awkward. It was so we never from the beginning had any sense of how it was going to play out. And I think that's really always been the theme. We've never come, I won't say we've never come with an agenda. Occasionally there's been things that we've needed to bring to the group to discuss. But in general, there's always been that sense of allowing an unfolding in whatever direction it wanted to go. And some of our meetings were quite rocky in the beginning because not everybody would want to sort of just surrender into that flow, and not everybody stayed in the group. But over time, it's the people who want to be that, take the sort of risks Anne was talking about to actually experience the field. And so we just never know where it's going to go and what's going to happen. So I can't really answer how the other approach might work because that's never really been our way of doing it. Go on, Anne.
I'm going to disagree with
Disagree.
you.
It's fine.
No, what you said is true in one regard, in one aspect, and especially in the beginning. It was something that was given between the four of us. It was a given space. It was a given space, and everything grew out of that. But I think quite early on, I did recognize the potential in especially when we invited more people in, that there was something very specific that could happen, and it probably resonated with the Andrew period, when we were working in this intersubjective way. So I kind of did have an agenda actually from very early on, but because we didn't want to go through a leadership format. We wanted it to be just a very democratic, open field. But I have to confess, I was pretty determined to push for this potential. And I probably was a bit of a pain in the neck at different times while, because I just saw that, it was beautiful when we all did get together. And I think a lot of people who'd been out of spiritual life for a long time and were really missing community and really missing the camaraderie of their Dharma brothers and sisters, was suddenly in a space where it was, and they were loving that intimacy and that ease and that connectedness. And that is beautiful, and I appreciated that. But I knew that there was a higher order, and I couldn't settle. And I think that probably cheesed a few people off at different times. Yeah. Would that be fair to say, Peter, what I've just said?
It would, but it also it also did, because we did have some rocky moments at the beginning where the field I describe it in the book as wobbling, where the sensitivity to that interconnectedness was overridden by someone bringing something more personal, but in a way that, not in an open way to investigate, but in a sort of this is who I am and this is what you're going to get sort of thing. And then those of us who weren't quite so stable in the field would also then find us, describe myself wanting to retreat from that awkwardness and that discomfort, whereas Anne had a greater sensitivity and sort of held the field in a way, allowing us to sort of come back into so it was quite crucial in the early days. It allowed a sort of a continuity to happen, that it might get quite disrupted, but someone was holding the space. And I thought that was very vital, certainly in the early. I think more of us are stepping up into that role now. Would you agree?
Yes, definitely. And it was like at a certain point, because for quite a long time, maybe for the first year, I felt very alone in that, because there wasn't a lot of resonance, or it's such a subtle, the field is subtle, it's difficult to grasp. And when it's there, you recognize it. But when you come out of that, it doesn't belong to the mind anymore. So it's not something you can really put in your pocket and go, oh yeah, I can identify that. It's more nebulous than that in a way. But so someone like Peter, for example, always loved the group, was always passionate about what we were doing and how it was all unfolding. And then he got it, he totally got it, and other people totally got it. So suddenly we were all looking through, or many of us were looking through the same eyes. And that became the the status quo, if you like. So even people who weren't so tuned in could actually find their place in that very easily, because it was the dominant quality of our being together.
And in that early period where you felt like you were more alone in holding the explicitly transpersonal purpose of the field, let's say, how comfortable were you in sort of confessing that hope and that function, that aloneness to the other members of the team?
I kept it completely hidden. I kept it completely hidden. I think because we had come together in not wanting leadership, and I didn't want to be the leader. I didn't want that role. You know, I purposely turned away from that role prior. So it was, I was kind of operating in an underground way. I didn't want to bring that up until we were stable, until I knew that it was all, you know, that we'd found our footing in that. I
I
did
think there
confess.
was also a recognition in others of us who were starting to tune into the field how crucial that was. It wasn't that Anne wasn't invisible in what she was doing. We kind of plugged into her stability as a way of getting back into that sort of that recognition of what was going on. So yeah,
Yeah, I was happy to, and
it was an anchor point.
yeah, I was happy to stick my neck out and put a stake in the ground for this. I wasn't going to let that opportunity that I knew we had go by. I wasn't prepared to do that.
Peter, there was something you mentioned a few moments ago that is a curiosity for me and also a theme that runs through the book, which is how do you tell the difference between when someone is bringing something up from an authentic place that's a risk and it's personal content that serves the field and maybe the field feeds on it and grows and changes them versus when a person's personal storytelling sort of hijacks the space and begins to trivialize the experience?
It's a sense of ease versus dis-ease. You know, when the whoever's bringing their stuff is open to putting it out there in a way that they're vulnerable, they're open to people getting in there and investigating it with them and working with them and just listening to them, actually, that quality that allows them to perhaps go a bit further than they would necessarily do in a different environment. There's an ease of being that you sense within the field, within the group. It's everyone's. You're quite relaxed in the process. Whereas when someone brings something that is really closed off in a way, that there is a sense of discomfort. And to begin with, I mean, my experience of that discomfort was that it was my problem. So I would start to want to close off because I didn't like that sense of dis-ease, that uncomfortableness. And then to start to recognize that it's not my problem, that this was disrupting something that was organically happening between us. So it's that starting to develop the sensitivity that not to personalize the experience of discomfort and make it my problem, but to actually stay open and recognize that what was actually happening was disrupting the field, and really something had to be said in as gentle a way as possible. But yeah, so it's that sensitivity to something that's very deep within yourself, actually, because the way we've got to be careful how we talk about this field as something external. It's not. It's something that we're all meeting in, but it's also very deeply part of yourself as well. So it's starting to be sensitive to your own inner experience in a way without personalizing it, and I think that allows a greater wisdom in terms of interpreting what's actually going on. Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Anne?
I think it stands out like a sore thumb when someone is expressing not from that authentic place that talking about. And it's interesting in the group because we've had a few guests who, have tried to dominate the meeting in that way. And everyone picks up on it, and no one is willing to allow that to go on for too long. Not in any kind of an aggressive way, but just trying to guide the person out of the conversation, or in some way, indicate that actually we'd like to go in a different direction. So I think what Peter said is absolutely right, but it's not difficult to tell the difference between spaces at all. It's very, very clear. It's very clear.
It seems like there's always an element of magic and surprise about how people show up in these things and who gets drawn into them. But there's also an interesting question about what backgrounds and what capacities might make a person more ready to show up as a participant, and if there was some magical way to, have the right resume, what would you be looking for? Like, what might be an indicator that somebody's really ready for this kind of practice?
It's something I touch on early in the book, actually, that I think, in a way, the four of us where the spark sort of ignited between us had some training in interpersonal dialogue in the community we were in, and lots of experience, actually, not all of it positive, some of it quite traumatic, but it was very much part of the ethos. That sense of, when you're meeting with other people, acute listening, following a thread, not just bringing something that you want to say, that, sort of actually learning how to put your own stuff down and then listen and find an authentic response rather than a sort of performing response. So I think we had quite a lot of training in that. So that's sort of, in a way, it was like seeds had been planted in the past, although it had been, 20 odd years since we'd been in that environment. But that sort of, we've slipped into that quite easily. But I think it does, for the group to work, I think there needs to be a certain degree of spiritual maturity, people who've done some work on themselves, who've actually started to, who first of all have had a glimpse of who they actually are. And maybe they're not stable in that, but they've found the truth of who they actually are, and can certainly relate to that. So yeah, I would say it was a degree of spiritual maturity, but also what we found later in the group, as we started to bring more people in, we were bringing in people who were quite rocky in their own realization, who hadn't really stabilized in, they'd had glimpses, but they were struggling. And we found that they came into the field and almost just relaxed into it, almost without realizing that's what was happening, and started to speak from a place of real vulnerability in a group of strangers who they'd never met before. And I think they surprised themselves as well. So I don't want to say it's not going to happen unless you've reached this certain level, because I think the field itself can facilitate a level of relaxation that allows something deeper to come through. But I think for it to really kick off in the beginning, you need people who've done some work on themselves, and who've got some degree of understanding of who they are and what the mechanics of what's actually going on is happening. Again, I'm going to hand over to Anne, because she's probably going to say something wiser and deeper.
Not at all. I mean, Peter and I are planning to create new groups with people who don't have as much experience, and experiment with that, because what we're finding in the original group is there are now, it's been extraordinary, the transformation, Layman, because the long-term seekers, 30, 40, 50 years on the path, done everything they could, and still feel like, oh, I've got it, I haven't got it, I've found it, I've lost it. There's like a lack of resolution in their search, regardless of how much practice they've done, how many teachers they've been with. And we've found that people coming into this very supportive environment where there's no fear, no one's going to do anything to you, and where you're encouraged to speak your deepest truth and your deepest realization and have that reflected back to you from your peer group, reinforced and acknowledged. And that gives people a tremendous confidence to keep moving and to start integrating all of that understanding that has been there but hasn't had an opportunity to take root. So it's been fabulous to see the rapidity of the transformation in people, for people who've been struggling for maybe decades, suddenly going, I know this, I know myself, I know, and then just speaking and expressing from that space consistently. So that's been really spectacular. I've forgotten what the question was. I just wanted to say all that.
I just want to add. Can I add something in at this point? Because
Yeah.
we had one meeting, and it was not long. It was actually about the time we did this big expansion of the group, which was a bit of an experiment. We brought 10 people in over a course of 2 meetings rather than one or two. It was this sort of big expansion, and we had one of is this totally sweet man, been a long-term Dzogchen Zen practitioner who's done more retreats than you can count on, on whatever. He's deeply immersed in this, but he'd never come home. He'd acquired so much understanding, so much knowledge, so much experience, but something hadn't quite happened. And in this meeting, he described how he was able, because of the support of the field, to just let all that all that sort of decades of spiritual work go, and all the things he was hanging on to as I've learned this, I've got to just let it go and realize he didn't to be thought to be authentically who he actually was completely independent of any experience. There was that real deep letting go into being beyond anything needing to support it. And wow, it just took the meeting just went, whoa. The field just deepened, and people who were struggling were suddenly starting to see a way through their own process, and that was just mind blowing. It was wonderful. Yeah,
Well, he stepped out of his Dzogchen training. It's like he stepped out
yeah,
of, it was like releasing himself from all the conditioning of his path, which hadn't given him the trust. The issue was trust. He said, how can I trust
yes,
that it's
yeah,
real? And we were like, well, what are you experiencing now? Because we could see that he was in himself. He was established in himself. And so as he began to speak, he wasn't needing affirmation or reassurance. The trust was arising within himself. So that's the dynamic in the group, which is quite magical. It is quite, very powerful. So I can't remember what the original question was.
Neither can I. It doesn't matter. The one of the things I'm hearing and that I'm resonating with, that I'm seeing as well, is that uh, like a trans lineage group or a transcultural group allows people to see that other people are going through this and that it's independent of your particular background or style of practice, which allows you to step out
indeed,
of that to some degree. You're not relying on that to get the belonging. And to
yeah,
me, it's part of an interesting, almost archaic sensibility, right? Like the natural ancient way is to do this as a tribe to some degree, right? And to not
yeah.
require as much internal social identification, to just show up as bodies participating in this. But to continue that line of thought, another element that I see people speaking to a lot around the archaic sensibility is place, right? That there seems to be some possibility of interactions between ecosystems and fields. And that's people sitting together in one location. That seems to be how we were doing this for 30,000,
Mm,
100,000 years, however long this has been going on. But you guys are doing it digitally. So
mm.
I'm curious what you experience as the relation to place. Is the digital the place? Is the planetary the place? Is place some additional thing that you might get into, or is place not as important as some people think it is? How is this field related to place?
Gosh, and it's not. That's actually not a question I've thought about. So, I mean, we are we meet from there's people from West Coast America to East Coast Australia, and I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. Um, I think we're just aware of the space that we're meeting in. That the space we meet in is the place. Um, I think part of it is that everyone is familiar now with the digital landscape. Um, it's not a new environment, so there's a certain ease and comfort with operating in this space. You don't you don't feel the person is not there in a way. There is a sense of because what really comes through in the meeting is presence. You really are aware of that presence when it comes alive between us all. So um, I think the screen is the place in a way. I don't know. I don't know how to take it any further than that. Any
I
thoughts,
haven't.
Anne?
Yeah. This is something I'm learning from you, actually, Layman, through going into your work. Um, I'm reaching here for the understanding, so forgive me if I'm a little slow in expressing. That the group has functioned as a transformative crucible for the individual and for the group and for the understanding of the field. But what I'm now kind of leaning into or becoming aware of, and a lot of it has to do with reading your work, is that that sense of belonging to oneself and belonging to the small community of the group is really a portal for a deeper belonging. And that belonging is belonging to human life, to the soul in life. So belonging to the earth, also belonging to the sky. You know, it's like the total human experience that we've kind of become disassociated from in these many millennia. You know, that it was a natural thing before to feel that you were completely plugged in and that you belonged in this whole, you know, universe and earth and everything else. So what's opened up for me in the last few weeks is that the group is not only about the movement from the me space of my spiritual investigation, my transformation, to the we space and the field, but the implications are broadening out. Like, we can go out into the world not just with this inner sense of being, but with a totality of that belonging. And if more and more people do that, that becomes a part of the thing that can change culture. So that instead of all of these people who are disenfranchised from their own lives and their own selves and they don't even have communities, that we can start to introduce and help to introduce that deep soul-based, human-based, reality-based being here in our totality in the most natural way. So that's my leading edge, if you like, which I want to thank you for, because you really open my eyes to those sorts of possibilities.
Appreciate that. In the integral languaging, there's a lot of focus on the validity of first, second, and third person experiences of things. And Peter, you were mentioning, the field's not just a thing out there; it's also in here. It's a way that we hold our own experience that's personal, but not necessarily in a personal way. I'm curious about the relationship between viewing it as something you're experiencing, viewing it as something we're producing, and viewing it as something that's almost like an agent or an organism of its own. And are there like better times to do one than the other? Is it about getting the balance right? Is it something that actually exceeds and can't be bound by those categories? How do you sort of hold the nature of the field?
I think, I mean, like Anne said, in a way, the understanding is just deepening over time of what this actually is, and how, I liked what Anne was saying about how the we space has actually broadened out now into the totality. Um, my sense from the very beginning is that it wasn't something external and magical that we were sort of meeting, but in some way we were the transformers that it was operating through. So it was, but but it was way deeper than anything I had personally identified with as me. So it's almost like those levels were all present at the same time. So there was a recognition that this was it. I describe it in the book as sort of realizing there's a place within our experience where we're not separate at all, where there is a commonality, that boundaries dissolve, or there are no boundaries, and that is in a sense the where the field is coming from, or what the nature of the field actually is. But there's layers within that then that where I become more identified with my experience. So I've never really, in the context of the group, I've never really separated it out, except maybe in the early days when it did get a bit rocky, and I then started to sort of personalize what was happening rather than allow some sort of flow. I think in the recognition of the flow, which is very often the dynamic of the meetings, you're sort of sensitive to your own tuning of what's going on, but realizing that's happening in a bigger and bigger context as well. So it's sort of multi-dynamic. I don't think I shift between normally, you know. I think there's a recognition it's all happening and it's all part of one bigger process. Um, does that make sense? Happy for you to go in and pick things out if you want to, because
And pick on you.
um,
No, I like what you said. I think I'm aware of there being different levels to this thing, or different. So there's the connectedness that we feel. There's that quality, and then there's the deep dive where something else opens up. And then there are higher levels, or deeper and wider higher levels, I don't know how you describe it, where you can actually pull information, which are instructive layers. There's almost like there are fields of knowledge that we can access through the sensitivity that you describe so well, Peter. So I think for me, they're the sort of layers, that you see with people, say, struggling in the group to understand something. And then there's a moment where they literally pull something in of, oh, that's it. I understand. I've been looking at it from this point of view. Now I understand. And I think, and also in the Andrew days, there were tremendous experiences of pulling knowledge that we didn't really have individually or as a group. We were able to access that. And that's very, very exciting. And again, that has tremendous implications, I think, because I remember I recently saw something of yours, Layman's, where it's like no one person can understand or solve all the problems. No one person can comprehend this or design a solution. But the collective intelligence that's available in this way that we're describing can possibly actually inform us of what needs to be done step by step. So I personally find that very thrilling because it's so open-ended and so unlimited in a way that in ourselves, we often find ourselves quite limited. So that's very, very thrilling and engaging.
can I add something to that? Because this feels like a very liminal moment in the evolution of our group. Because I think with the publication of the book and it going out and starting to catalyze conversations so I'm already contacting other groups that are, I've got a couple of conversations lined up with other groups that are going through the same thing to sort of start to dialogue outside of our group and share those experiences. But also having this conversation with you just feels like plugging what we've learned in the group into a much bigger conversation that's happening in so many different arenas. I've just retired from work, which is quite a relief in a way, because now I feel I've got the time to start to explore all these different connections. It's like nodes in Indra's net. You're starting to be aware of and starting to want to reach out and make those connections and share. Not so much share what we've learned, but actually explore together from that place. So this feels like a very sort of dynamic and liminal moment in the evolution of our group, sort of finding itself, because we're very aware we're not alone. This isn't something that we're doing on our own. This is sort of emerging, it's popping up all over the place. And it just feels really exciting to start to plug into that now from the experience of what we've learned as a group. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you
it's
for
very
inviting us
exciting,
into
and
this conversation.
it's delicately balanced at this moment because there's a realization that there's a bunch of these things going on, but re- really there's not that much of it going on. In some ways, we still don't know very much about it. So this is a time
Right.
for participant observers to be sharing information like as if we were
Yeah.
18th century natural scientists, sort of like, well, what did you see? And then what did it do?
Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
We're the modern day explorers of
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
whatever this is. Yes, indeed.
Um, you know, an inquiry for me is about uh, permeable but distinct roles that individuals might play within particular fields, right? Because I go into fields and I'll get a little bit of feedback about, oh, you're a trickster philosopher or something like that, and they kind of, it's like the feedback from the others is they want me to add a certain thing, right? They want me to
Right.
call out things that are at the edge and put them in the center. They want some humor and some transformation and maybe more of anything's liveliness. They want the field to be enlivened in ways. And so I think, well, that's, I want to show up as a regular participant, but I also want to respond to the feedback I'm getting. And is everyone getting some kind of attenuated feedback that helps them be a particular organ in the emerging body? Do you guys see sort of roles and specializations emerge to some degree?
I think I'm starting to recognize within our current group people who are stepping into caring role, who are not just turning up to the meetings for the experience of dissolving into something greater than themselves, which is always extraordinary and really life affirming. But actually starting to recognize that they have a role to play in facilitating that. So there's certainly one or two people within the group who are just naturally sort of evolving. So you feel their presence in the meeting as a carer as well as a participant. So I'm not sure we've been going long enough or that we're big enough for sort of that sort of um, distinction to start to that there's many roles. But I suppose Anne's got a role. If we're a little off course, we might sort of look to Anne to provide a centre again. I mean, I'm the sort of logistician. I sort of organise the meetings. I'm the one that makes it happen. So there are roles, but I don't think they've become that delineated quite yet. Maybe that will come. I don't know.
I think, well, I think you're more than a logician, actually. I think you have a different role, as well as that one in the group. He's like the granddaddy of the group. There are people who, like, can I say names, or is that exposing people? I won't say the names. But different people are very trustworthy. So there are some very trustworthy members of the group, and when they speak, everyone really listens very carefully. So there is a quality that they bring, a reliable quality that they bring. Our Dzogchen friend brings this absolute silence, like a rock. It's like a deep, deep silence. And other people bring, whatever it is. So I think in a way, even though it's maybe not as defined as being the shamanistic trickster, philosopher, however many names you have, I think quite a few names. There are specific roles that are being played reliably are being played in the group. I mean, for me personally, I'm wrestling a little bit with my role in that because I'm willing to I'm willing to push a little bit further with people, get a little bit more personal, ask questions that other people are maybe too polite to ask. That can also become a ceiling on the group. That can, that person can act as a ceiling and stop other people from rising up and taking risks. So I'm really questioning my participation and role in the group. So yeah, I think it's part of it. I think I think that becomes inevitable, really, that you get landed with a role, and for good and bad, for positive and negative.
Yeah, that's really important. I think the roles have to be understood as always incomplete, permeable, have blurry edges, but also there's a responsibility of deconstructing your own role without ceasing to perform it.
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
And definitely not identifying with it. So that becomes another, structure that you operate from within. It's tricky. It's tricky.
It is. Yeah.
It is tricky because there's so much. For example, I had a bunch of conversations with Andrew Cohen about various things that may be pertinent to this conversation, but one of them is this slight disagreement or mutual curiosity we had about how much one wants to assert higher qualities versus hold them in a kind of bracketed or quotation mark way, right? And he was very concerned that people uh, have the potential of intense access to transpersonal conditions by really believing in them enough to make sacrifices for them in various ways. And he was very suspicious of like putting the absolute in quotation marks or things that I would like to do that I think make them more accessible and more permeable without withdrawing any of their power. But that's an ongoing balance between, sort of how intensely to be in it versus how to make sure you're not overindulging in certainties and identities, even if those certainties and identities are uh, that of a transformational phenomenon of some kind.
Well, his methodology wasn't hugely successful. Just to put that in, really, so in some ways he was tremendously gifted and visionary and to be applauded, but in other ways, he fell very far short because of those sorts of absolute positions that he took. So what do you think, Peter?
Well, I think what's striking me is that there's a really human quality to our group. Um, Andrew brought a certain sort of absolutism that, to me, towards the end of, because I wasn't there for the last 10, 15 years of the community, and I do think things did change and evolve, but certainly the point I was at, there was this almost divorce between the absolute nature of the teaching and what Andrew was trying to get us to step into, and our basic humanity and conscience, and putting it in a living context where it made sense as a human being. And I think that's one of the things I feel within the group. There's a very human quality. We relate to each other as real living human beings with vulnerabilities and sensitivities, and so it's got a beautiful living quality to it, which I felt was this cold, absolute nature and it was a little bit like being in a pressure cooker in Andrew's community. The pressure would be ramped up, and some people would get breakthroughs under that pressure. They'd be like, wow, I get it. But other people just crushed under it. And I think what we've found facilitates the arising of this field between us is that sense of ease and being relaxed in who you actually are. That actually that pressure cooker thing really is counterintuitive to what it is we're starting to, we're learning to experience, and how to facilitate it and generate it. So yeah.
I agree, Peter. And I also feel that in terms of human relationships in general, and in kind of a new world that we would like to create, if you like, as well as in our little group, that a kind of humility and respectfulness and geniality and openness is really key. If you come charging in going, it should be like that, I've got all the answers, it should be like this, and imposing your ideas and yourself, we're going to end up in exactly the same situation that we have now. That's how it's always been. But there's a way for people to function. I know I'm speaking to people who know exactly what I'm talking about, so forgive me if I'm stating the obvious. But there's a way of being in oneself, as oneself, where you're just naturally respectful. You're just naturally in relationship, not as the other imposing, but as a withness rather than a separateness. And I think that's really key from the micro to the macro implications. I think that's really, really key. And I feel that one of the things in the groups that we're going to create, hopefully, part of the training of that is the maturing of what it is to be a human being, and what it is to be a human being in relationship to other human beings, so that this field has an uninterrupted, unwalled expanse that it can operate and function in, and it's not always running into a brittleness of the human ego. So, which is always the downfall of
Yeah.
collectives and
Yeah.
visions and hopes for the future.
And for me, the real difference was, in my experience in Andrew's community, was everything was ultimately fear-based.
Yes.
You felt continually under threat. You weren't quite
Yes.
sure what it was that was under threat. But there was that sort of underlying, whereas in our community, our group, there's a real joy in being together. There's that quality of, yay, here we are again. Isn't this fabulous? And you don't even need to state it, but you can just see people light up when they come into that environment. So it's actually radically different. This is never
But
going to happen through fear.
no, through fear. But that is the potential, isn't it, Peter? Exactly what you said,
Yeah.
that this is the human
Yeah.
nature left,
Yes.
courage to be itself in the right environment, with the right characteristics, the right qualities. And this is the natural expression. And then you can really create something. Then you've got the means, the human means.
And I feel it here. I mean, I'm really enjoying our conversation, and I can see you're smiling. And so there's that sort of natural, when you get to that place where there's nothing to defend and nothing to protect, and actually everything's open to with the curious eye. There's something really wonderful about being alive in just that sort of way of engaging. So yeah.
Has
I think what Peter was trying to say is that we fell in love with Layman. I think is that
oh
what you're trying to say?
well, thank you. I love you both, and I love fields. I'm curious, as your group field has expanded and evolved, how the male female balance has been, and to what degree we think that might matter.
Well, it's I think what happened, there's something quite significant happened not long after we had the big expansion of the group. And I think we almost missed it. We had one of the ladies who joined has a background working with women in violent situations, so she's very aware of the potential male-female dynamic and potential of threat and not necessarily feeling uncomfortable. I mean, one of our meetings, she said towards the end, she said, I just want to say, this is the first time in my life I've been with a group of men who I don't really know all that well, where I feel completely at ease and not threatened. And we went, oh, that's really nice. That's great. And then it was only sort of hours later, Anne sent an email around saying, do you realize what she brought to the meeting? That actually starting to see that the men were not just there as individuals, but there was actually a sense of the group of men as a presence in and of itself that was greater than any of the individual men, even though they were all bringing different aspects of themselves. There was something that sort of encapsulated them as a group that was trustworthy. And starting to see that's also the same with the women. So we haven't really gone much further into investigating that, but I think the potential for the male-female dynamic and the evolution of that is enormous, and I think we've only begun to scratch the surface of that. I mean, Anne, please say more, because you were the one that sort of picked up on that sort of
No,
the significance of what she brought.
I think you said it very well. I think there's such a again, Layman, there's a sort of equal number of men and women. It's not weighted on one side or the other. But the quality of trust between the sexes in the group is really astonishing. It's really astonishing. And the respect that the men have for the women, but not in a kind of a performative way, but just again in this natural human way of, yes, of course, you're my equal and my friend and yeah, my close one. So I think Peter described the quality of the men in the way that you did was, I thought, very accurate. That I was used to seeing everyone as individuals, and suddenly to realize that the men all embodied a certain groundedness, respectfulness, quiet strength, a willingness not to dominate, over other men or over the women. And the women are beautiful. They're all kind of, they're not following or bowing down or taking second place. In fact, there was an incident where we had a guest who was dominating and trying to lecture us about something. And it was the women who said, I'm sorry, but we don't want to go in this direction. It was the women who stood up, not the men.
Yeah.
So the usual battle between the sexes seems to have been transmuted into a completely different thing, which I think is, again, hugely significant, because this is one of the many crushing divisions in human life, isn't it, between men and women? And it's possible that it doesn't have to be like that. And it all comes from this one root that we've been talking about for the last hour.
And I'm glad you brought that incident, because I was going to say it if you didn't. But actually, I think the men in the group have got something to look at. That there is this wonderful quality of being together in something. But if it can't stand up and rise to meet a circumstance, that needs something else, that needs, a certain power or I don't know, it's hard to find the words, but something that a genuine response to a situation that needs to be addressed. And if that's not arising, there's questions to be looked at and to be answered. So yeah, it's still a work in progress. But,
balls. I think what you were looking for is balls.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Mm. Well, another thing I find myself very curious about is the role of what's sort of just immediately outside the circle of the field. We meet and we have these moments, and these moments are not fixed in time because you sense them coming and they stray outside of the allotted time block. But there's a sort of we're in it, we're holding the field, but there's other events like in person. There's there's a conversation in a hot tub later, or three people are going for a walk or out for drinks, or if it's online, there's other emails are going around between members of the group. And also, they all have other people in their lives who, to some degree, facilitate their ability to be there. So, I'm curious how we think about like that outer wheel. Right? There's the inner wheel of the event directly, and this outer wheel of supportive and supplemental engagements and persons, and what role do they all play, and how do we be good custodians and cultivators of that extended element of the field.
I think one of the things people fairly early on in the group started to recognize, particularly as they in under the sort of transformative element of the field, people started to come home to themselves in a way that was, more permanent and less sort of wobbly. Started to say that their experience out of the group was that that rippled out, that people recognized without necessarily saying what was going on, but they felt the quality of their engagements with people outside of the group was affected by who they'd become within the group. So I think that's really important, that it's not, this thing is not just a sealed container where wonderful things happen and then we go back to our ordinary lives, whatever that is that you are transformed in the process, and that transformation ripples out. I found it in my work. I was sort of a senior leader in an NHS team, um, and it was quite touching at my leaving do on Friday, getting reflected back to me the qualities I'd brought into that role, which I didn't necessarily identify. It wasn't something I was doing consciously as a performance, but what was reflected back to me as who I was within the team was really like, wow, that was I didn't really realize that. But so I think, and I've learned by becoming more open in and of myself through learning that how to do that within the field, within the group. I become more open to other input coming into me. So, we've got some extraordinary members in the team, and I feel I've learned as much from the exchanges as they say they've learned from me. So it's very much a two-way process again, like we talked earlier. There's something about engagement that allows something. The book's called The Space Between Us, and it's not just in the group; it's the space between us in whatever encounters we're involved in. There's a magic of that can emerge, even if one of the people is not necessarily conscious that that's what's going on. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice.
One thing that stands out to me is the importance of um, a clean, authentic pipeline of information that gets handled outside the main circle, right? Because I think one of the things that can go wrong in some classical ways of doing this is something's happening in the main engagement, and then people are going aside, going, I don't know if we're handling that correctly, but that information is not coming back into the center, right? Or someone was affected later in a different way, or something like that. That sense of enfolding the edges back into the middle seems really important to me. But another thing that comes up for me is um, the need for supplemental opportunities. Like a thing came up recently in North Carolina. So we were holding this little sub event within the field, and things started to come up between two people who most of us didn't know had been in a relationship that had a little bit of trauma in it. And you can see that the woman who was holding that didn't want to let it go too far in a direction that might interfere with the fabric of the field, but also didn't want to shut it down and was looking to get that balance just right. But in order to get that balance just right, some elements of it had to be handled later, so that after that circle broke, then a couple of us had to be over with the different people going through it in a deeper way so that it could come back. But without our ability to do that, um, handling the balance just right in the main circle wouldn't have worked well. Well,
It takes a lot of
yeah,
sensitivity. It takes a lot of sensitivity
Yeah,
to handle
yeah.
human dynamics and human relationships. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. And there are no hard and fast rules. You have to feel out every individual situation as it arises.
Conversations are happening outside the group as well. So um, I might want to say something to someone about just recognizing what they brought to the group that wouldn't necessarily have been in the flow within the meeting, but actually was also something that really needed to be acknowledged. So there's been some wonderful dialogues and conversations that have really gone quite deep, even just exchanging by email that wouldn't necessarily been appropriate within the group format because it would have disrupted the flow of where the meeting was going. So those conversations are happening as well outside the group. So there's yeah, it's not, as I said, it's not it isn't a sealed alchemical chamber. It's permeable. It's yeah.
I know that I mentioned and often mention the an archaic way of holding this as one of the basic options, but it's also very futuristic, and it's also got a lot of resonances with classic spirituality. But I'm curious, in your own feelings, does this seem more like something that's continuous or ancient and returning or newly emerging?
Both and um, it feels new in the sense it's emerging in the moment of the meeting, but it does feel that we're plugging into something that's deeper and always present, always ultimately the same, something, some deep resource that's always been present, but that that when it emerges into the now has this quality of freshness about it. Um, so it doesn't feel like it's new in the sense of like a plant just emerging and it's very fragile. It feels like it comes with energy and force and depth and meaning already. Although in the early days we very much felt we had to curate it and look after it. Um, it feels both ancient and completely brand new, completely of the moment and appropriate and needed, and to be celebrated. But it doesn't have that fragility of something that's so brand new. It's not got any depth or stability to it. I'm feeling my way here because
Yeah,
it's not
no.
something I've really
I
quite
think
looked
it
into.
also
But
contains the new, doesn't it, Peter? It's like it contains all possibilities. So
yeah,
I agree with what you like well, there's no way to prove any of this. There are no,
yeah,
I can't offer any proof except, one's sense of things. Um, but how I think it's, again, it feels like we've always lived in this. I don't know what you mean by archaic. Maybe for me, that's like a mythic, or I'm Australian. And so we're very much, in this country, aware to whatever degree, I think, um, of the land and of myth and of heaven and earth and God. That's the foundation of of what we're all standing on here. And so these fields or qualities, I feel, have always existed. But as they get reinterpreted through every generation, they bring something new. So because that is the field of all possibilities as far as I can make out. And so if you bring yourself into a degree of sensitivity that you can recognize it and participate with it, then that's the evolutionary edge, I guess. I'm just making this up as I go along, but that's the evolutionary, the new. That would be the new. But I don't have a sense. I'm like Peter. I don't have a sense that this is just dropped out of the sky. That's my sense, but I couldn't say for certain. I don't know.
someone said in the group, and it was one of those phrases that someone drops into a conversation sort of lightly, and it sort of goes, "Ooh," it sort of resonated out. They said, starting to trust that which has never not been present. And that was one of those ways of expressing it that you kind of went, yes, suddenly there was this sort of heart response. That's it. You've kind of, in a simple phrase, you've encapsulated something that's got real depth and life. And yeah, so that went in the book as well. So.
This is where we would normally end. We got started a little late today. I know we're in different time zones. How do we all feel about winding this down or keeping it going a little bit longer?
I'm up. If you've got more to ask, I'm in Anne's. It's early in the hours of Monday morning for Anne in Australia. I'm kind of Sunday afternoon, so I'm up for going further if you want to, but also
Yeah,
if there's
if you have
time
more questions,
constraints. Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay, yeah, maybe just a couple more.
Sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
One is I'm curious about the difference and or similarity of the quality of intimacy within a field compared to other kinds of intimacies in your life. Is there a distinct flavor or is it somehow of the same cloth?
I think it's easier in the group context, just because that's the nature of what we're meeting in, to remain completely as transparent as you're able to find in yourself. Um, the sort of the group feel that encourages that ability to just put yourself down and listen. Um, and I think to some degree, I'm finding now a certain stability in understanding who I am and what I'm learning through that. But that is sort of the self I take out into the world to some degree. But the world is a lot more challenging than the group itself. So there are certain circumstances where old dynamics can start to sort of play out. But I feel within my relationship itself, my partner, is that I'm managing to hold a certain. I've written a poem in the book called "Hold This Space," and it's recognizing the space that you find yourself to be operating in, and as yourself, is also the space that everybody else is operating in, but often completely unconsciously. And there's a way of, if you can carry and hold that space wherever you are, it allows a certain resonance or a coherence to happen. And the other person might not even know what's going on, but it allows them to soften and open in a way that maybe they wouldn't have. So I think I'm starting to find that there's a continuity between being in the group and being in the world now in a way that maybe 3 years ago wasn't so apparent. I think there's still work to do. Yeah, it's a process. um, and I think it's a process that never ends. I think, I don't know if there's ever a place where you're so transparent that you've completely disappeared. So, um, for me, in all my writing, I'm exploring the dynamic between what does it mean to recognize you're this unlimited, vast, dimensionless beingness functioning through a body that's got a history and all the dynamics of what it means to be embodied. And it's a living question for me. It's like there's no easy answer. So it's having that curiosity, that willingness to be open and questioning, to find out what's appropriate in this moment, what's the right thing to do. And it's that alone makes life really interesting, because there's no place to settle. You can't assume that you've found this answer that answers all the questions. It's an ongoing living investigation, really. So yeah.
I heard the question differently from you, Peter. I'll check it out with you, Layman. I heard, is there a difference in the quality of intimacy in your non-group relationships, non-field relationships, that there is with the field relationships? Is that what you were asking, or did Peter answer you properly?
I think I'm holding it in an open enough way that Peter's answer is great, but I would love to hear your response to the way that you heard it.
Okay. So I have a very close partnership relationship with my guy, who's not in the least bit interested in all of this stuff. Same with Peter's partner, not in the least bit interested in all of this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and my intimacy with him is of a different quality. It has a different quality, and it's very human. It's very connected. It's very warm. It's very nourishing on almost like an animal level, like if you curl up with your wolf pack or something, like it's that kind of deep happiness of that togetherness and that intimacy and that trust. And in the group, and I appreciate that enormously. It makes life kind of worthwhile. Um, in the group, there's a divinity aspect as well. So I don't know personally many of the people in the group. I don't know, who they are, what their lives are like. But I'm with them. I'm completely with them, and I'm with them in this rarefied state that is graced. It's just we're in a state of grace, and we know it, and that grace is shared, and that has a different quality to my personal human partnership.
Curious about the role of the body. When this is done in person, very often there's other practices and physical activities going on. Are there sort of any general rules of thumb about how to prepare your body to show up to be a better, fuller participant?
Oh, I think in a weird way, because it's a digital environment, and you sort of sink at shoulders and head. I'm not sure it's something we've ever. I know because of the nature of when we can meet, which these limited windows that kind of work well enough for most people to be able to plug into. For me, that's sort of generally about 10:30 in the evening, which is after the time I would normally go to bed. Um, so there is a sense of, I need to get the snooze in beforehand, just so I can be alert enough and present enough in the meeting to really be able to participate. So there's practical considerations just for the nature of the way we meet. In terms of deeper sort of relationship to being physically embodied, it's
It does carry through, though, doesn't
yeah,
it, Peter? I think
yeah,
what we've talked about, of coming home to oneself and then coming home in a we situation with a small community, and the groundingness of that and the fulfillment of that, that is actually a bodily quality, isn't it?
yes,
That's felt in the
yes,
body.
yeah,
That carries over. And I think it's a really, really important aspect. And again, I think, Layman, you've opened my eyes to what it means to bring what we learn in the group and the groups that Peter and I will create, to bring all of this out into the world consciously. So at the moment, we're not consciously talking about that in the way that Peter described, because, we are these little squares on a screen. But to become aware, much more aware of all the qualities that make up a fulfilled
mm,
and whole human being. And for that to become manifest in the world, that to become seen
mm,
and known in the world. Because we don't have examples. We have so few
yeah,
examples of
yeah,
wise men and wise women and natural people and naturally healthy people who are not obsessed with their health. You know what I mean? So it's like to take the potential that we've found in the group of being whole in oneself and to make that the full picture and to go out in the world as that and offer that as oneself. That for me is the main event now. That's really
Mhm.
what I'm most interested in.
Well, my final area of curiosity today is around these new groups that you might be setting up. And I'm curious what your general approach is, how people are being chosen, to what degree is it a new thing of its own, and to what degree is it like a lineage project of the field that's already been established? And what are you most curious to observe now when you have more examples to take advantage of as a researcher?
We'll get back to you.
Okay.
Yes, this is early days. This only really emerged in a conversation between Anne and myself about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Just, I think, with the book being published has sort of changed the dynamic. We're starting to realize that it's actually a key into lots of different doorways and different opportunities. And just as we were starting to explore where we might go together with this, and got COVID, completely knocked out for 3.5 weeks. So, and only really came back online about 4 or 5 days ago. And our main priority was to sort of make sure we were prepared to meet you, and be completely available and for that. So, as Anne said, we'll get back to you because it's
I think
early
also
discussions.
there is a key thing here in that I think we want, in the way that we've created a group that's now self-sustaining, there are enough people there who are realized in themselves, who can carry on without me needing to be there or Peter needing to be there, and to keep on creating those groups that outgrow us, that don't need us, that are self-actualizing groups. And also to bring in people who, we're blessed in this group that we have many mature, as Peter described, many mature practitioners, very wise people. But what is it also to bring in younger people and newer people who don't have the same background, and to establish this field in a different way. So it's all open to experimentation, and we will
Yeah,
have to find our way. We will have to find.
yeah,
We've got a fabulous background of 3 solid years of an incredibly successful working group, and it's begging to be reproduced. It's begging for that
yeah.
garden to grow and to to multiply. So that's as far as we've got so far.
Well,
Can we come
please,
back again and
yes, please do get
yeah,
back to me on this.
yeah,
This has been delightful. I really enjoyed the book. I love the flavor of the field that you're working with, and it's one of the most delightful things for me to be with people who are experienced in participating in these things, but also curious about how they operate. And so I would love to
yeah.
see what the next phase of the unfolding looks like.
No, we'll
Fabulous.
definitely keep in touch.
Yeah,
And thank you. It's been a
yeah.
delight for us
It
as well.
has been a real joy. It really has. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah, yeah, go ahead, please.
okay.
Okay, go for it.
And can I just plug the book? It was published on the 16th of September. It's available on Kindle and Amazon Print on Demand on all Amazon platforms. So I hope if the conversation has piqued your interest, you might feel you want to dive in and explore what the book, because that kind of goes into even more detail than we've been able to bring out in this meeting. So yeah,
Thank you.
thank you,
Pleasure.
Layman. It's been a joy. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. This was a really nice conversation for me because I'm very interested in the dynamics of new intersubjective fields operating as quasi-agentic healing and transformation spaces that do a lot of what we hoped traditional spirituality would do for us, and maybe a few other things besides. We're talking with Peter Mitchell, author of the recently published book, The Space Between Us, and with Anne Sweet, both longtime spiritual practitioners who have been holding and growing and participating in the production of a shared intimacy and resonance entity or circumstance, which is right on the cusp of mutating into its next phase. So I'm I'm looking forward to sharing with them what we might call zoological observations about these kinds of creatures, and also just looking forward to rejoicing with them. Also, this book is dedicated to Ganesh, and there he is right there, so that's pretty auspicious.